Welcome to the Whispering Pages Mysteries, a cozy mystery series set in the picturesque Cotswolds village of Ashwood. At the heart of the village stands Whispering Pages Book Nook, a warm and beloved bookstore run by Eleanor Ellie Davenport. Ellie has always believed that books hold more than stories. They hold clues, memories, and sometimes secrets that refuse to stay buried. When a mysterious death unsettles Ashwood, Ellie finds herself drawn into an investigation where hidden histories, long-kept rivalries, and carefully preserved reputations begin to surface. With sharp instincts and a love of puzzles, she discovers that truth often hides in the smallest details, between the lines of a page, in a forgotten letter, or beneath the quiet harmony of village life. In Ashwood, stories are never quite finished. They simply wait for someone willing to read them closely. Book 1. The Whispering Library. A missing book and a subtle clue in Lumley's memoir lead Ellie to wonder whether the author left behind more than a scandalous story. Perhaps a puzzle meant for someone willing to look closely. Chapter 1. Closing time. By 6:30, the light on the high street had turned the color of diluted honey. It happened that way most evenings in Ashwood and the Cotswolds. The stone facades, so sensibly beige in the morning, began to glow as though they'd been privately polished by the sun. Flower boxes spilled modestly over sills. A spaniel barked somewhere near the butcher's. The village exhaled. Inside, Whispering Pages. Book Nook. Eleanor Davenport stood on a small wooden stool and tried to persuade a copy of The Moonstone back into a space that did not technically exist. Literary optimism, she murmured to the book, pressing gently. That's what this is. The shelf disagreed. She stepped down, adjusted her glasses, and surveyed the mystery alcove with affectionate disapproval. It had begun as a neat, symmetrical nook. It had become, over the years, an enthusiastic sprawl. The bell above the door gave a polite jingle. Closed in 10 minutes, Ellie called automatically, smoothing her cardigan as she stepped out from behind the shelf. It was only Mrs. Finch from the florist, still smelling faintly of eucalyptus and good intentions. I shan't keep you, dear, Mrs. Finch said, gliding in as though the shop were a conservatory and she a visiting duchess. I've simply come to say, have you heard? Ellie smiled in the manner of someone accustomed to hearing most things slightly later than Mrs. Finch. Heard which particular catastrophe? Mrs. Finch lowered her voice, though there was no one else in the shop save a cardboard display of spring releases. Thomas Lumley. He's dead. The name landed somewhere between Ellie's ribs and her professional instincts. Dead, she repeated, because sometimes repetition allowed a fact to behave properly. This afternoon, at home, they're saying it was his heart. Mrs. Finch's tone suggested the heart had behaved suspiciously. Ellie's gaze drifted involuntarily to the front window display. 3 days earlier, she had arranged a neat pyramid of Thomas Lumley's latest memoir, Ashes Beneath the Ivy. The covers were a tasteful cream, embossed in restrained navy script. The subtitle had been less restrained. A village remembers what it tried to forget. It can't have been very unexpected, Ellie said carefully. He was in here last week arguing about font sizes. Yes, well, Mrs. Finch said, with satisfaction. He did stir things up. That, at least, was undeniable. Thomas Lumley had returned to Ashwood after 40 years away, moderately famous, faintly theatrical, and armed with a manuscript that named no names and implied everything. Old rivalries had acquired fresh oxygen. The Ashwood Trust had issued a politely worded statement about historical perspective. Councillor Wickham had spoken about community unity on social media with unusual frequency. Ellie had stocked extra copies. Are the police involved? She asked. Oh, yes. Detective Inspector Thorne was seen on the high street not half an hour ago, looking very inspector-like. Mrs. Finch paused meaningfully, as if that were a measurable quality. Ellie felt a small, involuntary tightening at the thought of D.I. Oliver Thorne. He had a manner that suggested interruptions were crimes in themselves. He had once referred to amateur speculation as unhelpful narrative embroidery within her hearing. "I expect it's very straightforward," Ellie said. "Natural causes." Mrs. Finch's expression implied that nothing in Ashwood had been straightforward since 1987. "Well," she said, drifting back toward the door, "if anyone knows what was in that book, it's you." The bell chimed again as she left. The shop settled. Ellie turned the sign on the door to closed and slid the bolt across with a small, decisive click. She stood for a moment, listening to the familiar hush, the faint tick of the antique clock near the counter, the whisper of pages adjusting to evening cool. Thomas Lumley had sat in the armchair by the fireplace only last Tuesday. He had signed 3 copies of his memoir for her, each with increasingly dramatic flourishes. For Ellie, who understands that stories are rarely finished when we think they are. She had laughed at the time. Now she found herself moving toward the display with a curious reluctance. The top copy of Ashes Beneath the Ivy was slightly askew. That was not unusual. Customers rarely replaced books with reverence. She straightened it. Something thin slipped loose and fluttered to the floor. Ellie frowned and crouched to retrieve it. It was not a receipt, not a promotional card. It was a narrow strip of cream paper, folded once. For a moment, and she would later resent herself for this, she considered leaving it unopened. It had the air of something theatrical, something performative. Instead, she unfolded it. The handwriting was tight, compressed, deliberate. Some stories are better left buried. Ellie sat back on her heels. The words did not shout. They did not threaten in any overt way, but they did not feel decorative. She looked at the stack of memoirs again. Then slowly, she reached for the copy Thomas had signed for her personally and flipped it open. Nothing fell out. She checked another. Nothing. Her pulse had begun to behave in a way she would later describe as literary irony. The shop, which had felt companionable moments earlier, now felt observant. After a beat, she stood, crossed to the counter, and reached for her phone. She hesitated. D.I. Thorne had already dismissed one of her suggestions about parking enforcement last autumn with glacial efficiency. Reporting an ominous scrap of paper found inside a controversial memoir hours after the author's death might not improve matters. Still, some stories are better left buried. Ellie looked once more at the neat pyramid of books in her window. Outside, the honeyed light had begun to fade. The village had shifted from gold to blue. She picked up her coat. "I'm not burying anything," she murmured, though whether to the note, the memory of Thomas Lumley, or herself, she wasn't entirely certain. Then she switched off the lights, locked the door, and stepped into the evening, unaware that by morning, Ashwood would no longer be discussing a natural death, and that someone, somewhere, had already realized she had found the note. Thank you for listening to Chapter 1 of The Whispering Library. Join me next time as the story continues in Chapter 2.